got to discuss this topic because I think it's a particularly interesting one, as there's been more and more discussion between, do you build in one highly scalable, generalized execution environment? Does it make sense to have your own application-specific chain? If you do, what's the right infrastructure to build that on? And that's what we'll be talking about with a bunch of builders that are taking different use cases and using these sorts of frameworks. But maybe before we do that, let's go around. Russell, you can start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, as well as what you're building.
Hello everyone, I'm Russell. I've been building a variety of stuff in the Web3 space for the last several years now. And with GoGoPool, we started out in liquid staking. We're the fastest growing liquid staking protocol on Avalanche with GG-AVAX. And now we're very much focused on this next evolution of Avalanche and helping projects to deploy their own L1 and building out all the tooling around what they need to do that.
Hi everyone, this is Nihat Gurmen. I'm a chemical engineer actually, so I started my professional career in the oil and gas industry. For working there for years actually, this is the first time I'm visiting Argentina. Argentina has a vibrant oil and gas industry actually, so it's funny that I'm coming there for a crypto summit. So life takes you kind of non-linearly sometimes. We are building Dexalot, so it's essentially a club DEX, central limit order book based exchange, which is omni-chain, so it's existing on its own L1 in the Avalanche ecosystem, but actually it provides a liquidity layer to all the mainnets it's connected to. Currently we are connected to Avalanche C chain, as well as Base and Arbitrum.
Hi, I'm Antoine. I'm a core contributor at HyperBlaze. We're also very passionate about order book trading, and we've come to the conclusion that right now order book trading is slow and costly on chain, whereas off chain it's super fast and you have deep liquidity, but you're exposed to the centralized risk of your counterparty. And you never know if there's some privileged actors in the system. Everybody remembers FTX and Alameda. And so we're trying to take the best of both worlds and also build a CLOB on an app chain, so on Avalanche L1 powered by the HyperSDK.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Gauthier. So I'm co-founder of Ash and Suzaku. So Ash is a SaaS that is focusing on helping builders manage and the life cycle of the L1 on Avalanche, kind of like a roll-up as a service, but for layer ones. And also now we're developing Suzaku, which is a restaking protocol in Avalanche, and the first one. And the goal is to help the layer ones that will launch in Avalanche decentralize by connecting them to operators that run the infra, as well as collateral and stakers that have this collateral for security.
Thank you. And just a little bit about myself, Austin Barak, running Relayer Capital. It's a hybrid liquid and venture fund that launched earlier this year. Prior to that, prior to starting Relayer, I was a partner at CoinFund for 4 years, and the focus of the fund is highly scalable infrastructure, which is this conversation, DePIN and DeFi. All right, so maybe to start off with the initial topic that I broached. What are the benefits? And let's assume that there's, we continue to iterate on generalized execution environments. So, there's potentially some scalability limitations, but we're not basing it purely off of the status quo today. Why does it make sense to build in, an app chain versus, the C chain, for example, or just some general execution environment? Russell, maybe we can start with you and just go around.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, first of all, if you're evaluating on if it makes sense to do an app chain or deploy on the C chain, I think one of the big factors is the initial scale of your application, where there are some benefits for smaller applications to deploy on the C chain, because you automatically can tap into all the liquidity on the C chain, the users that are there. But after the application gets to a certain point of scale or needs some sort of customization, then the C chain doesn't really make sense anymore. Where if you look even on Avalanche at some of the larger protocols like Trader Joe, their users are spending millions of dollars on fees that's currently is being burned on Avalanche versus accruing to Trader Joe itself in some way. So after getting to some level of scale, it's significantly cheaper to have your own app chain, and then you're also able to have more custom ability on what you're actually building on that app chain versus being hyper constrained to the way that the C chain is designed. So I can go more, but I'll pass it to them.
This is a vast topic, so you can definitely go for a half day on it. So basically, there are certain type of applications that are just simply not suitable for general public chain. So whether it's fee dynamics there, or network throughput, or speed, those kinds of things just preclude the building those kinds of applications on those public chains, C chain being one of them. And I can give from our personal experience, actually, because Dexalot started its existence in 2021 as a C chain application. So I can exactly tell you what happened there. So, and it was a proof of concept at that time. In the end, we wanted to release a beta version and get our, essentially, pipelines ready for the actual target implementation in the subnet. But the subnet was not ready yet, so instead of waiting there, we deployed it on C chain and wanted to get some experience. And it was originally fine, it was working fine, and then one day, the crabs arrived. Is there anyone a Krabada fan? Yeah. So when the crab mating season started, actually, it kind of sucked the entire air from the C chain, right? So I'm happy for the Krabada guys, obviously, but I cursed every day on their success because all of a sudden our beautiful application was not usable anymore. So
it's like if you think about Ethereum mainnet, it's the same thing with what happened to DeFi when NFTs really took off.
So, and I was going to say exactly the same thing that Dr. Gün mentioned this morning. One project's success essentially killed another project in the end, right? So, and we already had plans for a subnet deployment. So we just, when I say we, actually, my co-founder, Cengiz, accelerated the deployment of the subnet. And then within maybe 6 months time frame, with mainnet launch of the subnets, we were able to move our application from a single chain approach to C chain to subnet. And all the fees dropped like 100 times. And all of a sudden, all the activity in C chain became relatively irrelevant for us, for our network. And we essentially achieved a viability all of a sudden. Right? So that's what.
Maybe actually just to continue from here, because I think this question has been pretty well answered. I don't think you guys need to kind of dig further on those same points. But maybe we can shift to, all right, so there's a reason to have app chains. There's a lot of value. You have dedicated resources. You have customizability, all those sorts of things. What attracted you to Avalanche? Why build on an AVAX L1 versus an ETH L2, a Cosmos chain? There's a lot, or an alt EVM. Maybe Antoine, we can start with you. What's special about an AVAX L1?
So what's very special about Avalanche, in my opinion, is the warp messaging and now all the protocols that are being built on top. So we had Teleporter. We talked also about ICTT. And even though you're building your own L1, you're part of a wider group of L1s. And every time you build an L1, you fragment a little bit more the ecosystem. In a previous panel, people were talking about useless block space. It's a bit the same idea. And also, depending on what you do, you fragment the capital. So it's becoming inefficient, the whole ecosystem.
But before you continue, so warp messaging for people that aren't familiar, AWM, how does that compare, for example, to like IBC?
So I'm not the most familiar with IBC, but the warp messaging, the thing that for me is the most interesting compared, for example, to other rollups, is that you can be connected between the C chain and a subnet, but also in between all subnets. That's why you have this interconnection.
Do you want to add as well?
Yeah, maybe I can expand on this point against IBC. So how does warp messaging and IBC compare? So IBC is the native interoperability protocol of Cosmos. And Cosmos and Avalanche have a lot in common when you look at it from afar. And the main difference between warp messaging and IBC is that on Avalanche you have a registry chain, which is the P chain, where all the validators know each other and say they know their public keys. And so on Avalanche, you don't have to have basically a live client on both ends of the connection. So it's more a broadcast fashion messaging where anyone is able to verify messages from any other validator of the network. Whereas on IBC, you have to set up a point-to-point connection between the two networks and have a live client running on both ends, which makes it like a lot more costly to set up this connection for every single layer one that you
don't have the automatic connectivity between every single chain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I cut you off midway, but I wanted to ask that for everyone in the crowd, but please continue.
Yeah, no problem. The explanation was much more clear. And yeah, so this interconnection allows you to be really part of this ecosystem, and you can build more easily because we always talk about how cool it is to build a new L1, but there's also a lot of drawbacks that you need to consider depending on what you want to do. And so for me, this warp messaging and all the protocols that are coming on top are a real killer feature to get access to a lot of liquidity early on, access to users. And so you bootstrap your L1 with a good head start compared to a standalone EVM, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to complete on this, I think, yeah, comparing to Cosmos is a great way of like pinpointing the specificities of Avalanche. An extra point of Avalanche is that you have like kind of a native liquidity hub with a C chain, and like a chain that is already connected to all the different sexes, the different other chains. So you are like one point away from all the other Web3 blockchains and ecosystem tools. So this is one thing. And the other thing is HyperSDK, of course, but you know a lot about it as well. And I think once HyperSDK is live and shows what you're able to build with it, it's then that Avalanche will outpace Cosmos in terms of like beginning the go-to place for when you want to build a layer one. I think today it's still Cosmos when in people's mind, right? When you think about building an app chain, but I think once we have HyperSDK on top of warp messaging, the C chain, it will become the go-to place.
I would like to add a few things regarding the ICM from practical perspective, basically, and it's going to be a little bit alpha drop there. So the Dexalot contracts are in the audit currently, actually. So it took us about 1 month development time, and most of it is going to be about in the time frame spent in the audit process. Just giving an idea for L1 people who are thinking to jump in, that's what it takes. But what it brings actually within the entire ecosystem of Avalanche, you have about 2 to 4 seconds arrival times for general messages. So that's pretty powerful, actually, right? So when you compare to other solutions.
And I have one thing to add that wasn't mentioned here. That's another interesting trade-off to consider with the Avalanche L1s versus like the Cosmos model or the L2 model, and that's how the fee structure works, where if you look at like the ETH L2s, you're essentially paying based on how much transaction activity there is on your chain. Where with the Avalanche L1 model, you're essentially paying a fixed amount based on how many validators you have on your chain, and then as your usage like continues to increase, your costs there don't increase, which is another trade-off. Depending on what you're building, it can be pretty interesting to have that fee model.
So that actually brings us to an interesting point. Avalanche with HyperSDK and AWM, but now also ACP-77 and Avalanche9000 is undergoing a lot of changes. And we can talk, in a second about what the history has looked like for Avalanche and how we've gotten to this point. But ACP-77 and Avalanche9000, maybe Russell, you can start. What are they exactly? What does that unlock? How is that different from the current state of Avalanche?
Yeah, so I think I'll let someone else talk a bit more about the history, and I'll focus on, I guess, the thing that we're the most excited about with ACP-77, and it's drastically reducing the cost to experiment with launching your own L1. Because in the past, with having to put up 2,000 AVAX per validator and having to have 5+ validators to run your L1, it just wasn't accessible for people to play around with and to experiment with, so they didn't even try a lot of the times. And now with AP77, since it's shifting from that fixed cost to just paying an ongoing fee, it becomes much more interesting. And then part of the stuff that we're trying to build with GoGoPool is increasing that accessibility even more. So right now we're building an L1 launcher product where you don't have to interact with the CLI at all. You can essentially go to a nice interface, customize what you the configuration options you want for your L1, click a couple buttons, and boom. Now you have an L1 that's deployed on Fuji. You can deploy contracts on it. You can play around with it. And you can kind of step your foot into the water and see what it would be like for you to actually now deploy a production L1 and experiment around use cases for building your own L1. So very much excited about the changes, especially with ACP-77, of bringing down the accessibility and making it significantly easier to be able to experiment with this new technology.
So with subnets, the old versions of L1s or the old branding, they were already relatively independent chains, basically, right? But what 9000 and ACP-77 are bringing is fully sovereign, independent chains, basically, right? So, and with the full power of the security of an L1 chain that's coming. Last month we were in Singapore and we were kind of surprised. Our team was very surprised to see so many different blockchains coming to the market. I thought that period was over, quite frankly, but apparently not. There are a bunch of chains coming with incremental changes. For me, actually, I think with these latest changes with 9000 and ACP-77, these blockchains with incremental changes are over. I think they should just accept the fact that there is very easy L1s to deploy an Avalanche and focus on their business logic, application logic, and move on, basically. I think that's what the Avalanche9000 is bringing to the table right now.
Antoine, maybe to shift gears, and then I have another question, Gauthier, that I want to ask you, unless you wanted to add more to this.
I can add something, which is Avalanche ACP-77 allows you to also, interesting point for us that are building restaking is you can choose the roles that you want for who can join your validator set. And this allows building a lot of different models, security models that we will provide with Suzaku, going from proof of authority, of course, to proof of stake, but also having dual staking when you can use a restaked asset to increase the security of your layer 1, as well as your layer 1 token when it's not mature enough to ensure the security. And so, because now with ACP-77, everything is smart contract based, you can experiment a lot with different models. Even like node sales, we have customers that are interested in this space. And so it will be very interesting to see all this experimentation happen.
Yeah, and on that point, restaking is very much an emerging vertical within crypto, and there's a lot that's still being developed. But as you have more and more L1s, this security question becomes a pretty fundamental question, and you can think about security in terms of number of validators, in terms of value of stake, and a whole bunch of other ways. So what do you think, and you're focusing on restaking as one of the core areas with Suzaku, what's the appropriate amount of security? How do you think these L1s will pay for security? Yeah, maybe you can just expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think there are two aspects. So the first aspect is how decentralized is your layer 1. And so I think this is progressive process you are going to go through, probably starting centralized and then slowly onboarding different operators on the network. So first of all, how many operators do you have in your network? Are all the nodes held by one entity? Are your nodes on different cloud providers? Are they spread around different jurisdiction to be resilient against any kind of risk? And the other thing is, of course, economic security. When you start decentralizing, you need to ensure that everyone stays, no one is malicious and no one can harm your network. And it's very tied to the application. Some application will need very low level of cryptoeconomic security, especially because most of the requirements is actually around bridged assets. So if a network has a lot of asset bridged to it, then if this network is compromised, an attacker could bridge out the assets without actually holding them on the layer one, and this is where you need an extra amount of security.
Maybe just shifting gears, Antoine, unless there's anything additional, I think we talked about that a lot, but you're building an L1 with the HyperSDK, a cloud-based DEX focused on spot markets. How are you using these elements? What's it like to build out your L1? What do you think the timeline of these different stages look like? And also there's a whole bunch of different folks building L1s here. Maybe we can start with you as the final part of that question. What does the state of AVAX L1s start to look like over the next 12 months, 24 months, 5 years, 50 years? I don't know. 5
years and 50 years will be tricky, but for us, so to give a bit of context, HyperSDK is being built by the Avalanche team since last year, if I'm not mistaken. Right now, we're getting closer to testnet. I think there's a talk tomorrow about that. So it's very good because we have time to think about what we want to do, and Avalanche9000 is just in time for us to think about how we're going to deploy in the future. Right now, getting rid of this 2,000 AVAX per validator requirement, is great for decentralization. It's what Russell was saying. So the main thing for us is that we can now think about what we want to do. We have many different options. Suzaku restaking is one as well. And I think that Avalanche9000 will really empower the builders to have custom solutions and to bootstrap their L1s more easily. At least that's how we see it.
Cool. And then maybe just to continue from there, how many subnets with meaningful activity do you think we have, let's say 12 months from now, just to make the question more specific? Or not subnets, AVAX L1s.
It's very tricky, but it goes along with what Gun was showing this morning and the president of Avalanche Foundation with the parabolic curves. And I really hope that with Avalanche9000, we'll be able to see that kind of momentum, I would say. Giving numbers, I won't take the bet. I'll let somebody from the audience open a poly market about that. But I think we're going to see this parabolic curve.
So I just before this panel, I was talking to a few people in the outside, basically. And they're thinking of developing a game. And they kind of worked on it about 12 hours to run their own L1, basically, right? So it doesn't take much actually to create one. So that's what Avalanche technology gave us actually. So it's very, very, very admirable actually what they provided.
I think it depends a lot on what you mean by meaningful. Right now we have a list of 70+ teams that are looking to build their own L1, Avalanche L1, and they've been waiting for ACP-77. And I think, everything is going in place. I think it's going to be a lot of teams over the next over the next 2 to 6 months are going to launch their own Avalanche L1. Then after those start to have success, I think it's just going to continue to pick up from there. So I guess meaningful, my guess would be in 12 months, 100 to 200 meaningful L1s, and then probably a lot of smaller ones on top of that as well.
Well, one thing you're focused on at GoGoPool is helping these new L1s validate bootstrap their validator set, and then also provide a lot of the other services that they need to have an L1. So like, what are the things that a new L1 builder should be thinking about? We talked about validators. That's only one piece of it. What's the full picture in order to actually launch it?
Do you mean like from the infrastructure perspective?
Yeah, I mean from the infrastructure perspective, because obviously you need oracles, you need indexing, you don't need bridging because of AWM unless you want a specific bridge. You need restaking, potentially to add additional security, explorers. Like what are the things that maybe people aren't thinking about, and how is that being served?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the trickier parts, or like one of the pieces that's harder if you want to launch your own L1 versus deploying on the C chain, for example, is now you need these additional infrastructure pieces. And with what we're trying to do, we're trying to abstract away all of that infrastructure so the teams can focus on what they're actually building. But if you're deploying your own L1, you want an easy way to be able to essentially, I guess first stage is deploy something to Fuji, play around with it, see if this technology is interesting, understand how it works at a deeper level while playing around with the tech. Then when you're actually going to production, you need the infrastructure for the validators, you need an indexer for a block explorer if you want people to be able to explore your blockchain, you need the infrastructure piece of a relayer for the warp messaging, which you're almost certainly going to want, and those are the main infrastructure pieces. But teams don't really care about running the infrastructure for those. It's not what they're doing, not what they care about. So we're trying to abstract all that away from teams so they can focus on actually building their application. And what was your question? What was?
Well, what are those things that people need to be thinking about? So I guess you kind of just answered that.
Okay, yeah. And then, then on top of that, if you look at each of these areas you can go deeper on, where if you look at the validators, and he touched on this a little bit earlier, but we anticipate for a lot of teams, they'll essentially go through 3 different stages for recruiting their validator set. The first one is it'll mostly be permissioned, so it's the team or some trusted node operators that will initially run that initial validator set for that L1. Then stage 2 is most likely now they still have a trusted set of operators, but then they open it up to additional people that can now also run those validators with some sort of incentives. And then move on to phase 3, which is now they want to fully decentralize their network, and they essentially give up or they relinquish that privileged validator set that they have and have some sort of incentives for their community or whoever else to run those validators. And then if you think about just the life cycle of someone who's launching an L1, there's a lot more that you need than just the infrastructure. There's everything around the TGE, launching the token. That's an entire process in itself. You need a way to launch that, get partners through that, do that whole process. There's launching the L1. Then after you launch the L1, there's another layer that we're working on around incentives, where you want to now incentivize certain actions to happen on the L1 and do that to drive certain types of behavior. We're working on a solution for that as well. But TLDR, there's a lot you have to keep in mind when deploying your own L1. And I guess what we're trying to do is to help simplify that process and make it easier.
Just want to add a little bit.
I was going to actually ask you another question afterwards, but please.
Sure. So, essentially it's a balance between initial cost, operational cost, and technical knowledge that you have in the team. You have to have a good balance between all those 3 to be able to develop and sustain a validator set without kind of breaking anything. And I think between the lines, Russell mentioned all of these things. But there's one more additional thing that may be application dependent. For example, in our case, it's an exchange that's where some people can take advantage of if they know certain things ahead of time, right? So under those circumstances, we decided to keep that validator set in our own infrastructure, basically. So at this point, we are compromising on the decentralization a little bit to create a fair exchange environment, basically. But our long-term goal is obviously to go to governance as well as bring the full permissionless environment to it. But it's a community maturation process as well. Once we get there, obviously we will go for that route. But just wanted to highlight that application-specific aspect that may require you to do something with your own infrastructure as well.
Well, maybe you can expand on that point a little bit, because you know there's a lot of L1s on Avalanche that are building towards deployment. You're one of the ones that's already live, and you're having activity growing pretty quickly in terms of lots of volume being traded, which is super exciting. What as ACP-77 rolls out, as Avalanche9000 and all of these primitives, how does that, you mentioned potentially like the progressive decentralization and being able to expand the node set and things like that. What does this enable you to do in terms of what Dexalot is today versus where you'll take it as these things roll out?
So I think it creates a benefit for L1s that are planning to launch from scratch, basically. I think it's a huge benefit. They will not have some of the difficulties we had at the beginning, so that's one thing. Some of the auxiliary technologies that came with 9000, we will be benefiting from, like these ICM, which is the messaging primitive that makes all that token transfer and stuff available, possible, is going to be a nice addition to Dexalot, right? So the users will be able to create any type of transfers within the Avalanche ecosystem within 2 to 4 seconds finality, right? So that's a net benefit for us. It will free up, obviously, it has the possibility to freeing up a good amount of capital. We don't have to stake 2,000 AVAX, for example, and mainnet validation. And we will be shielded from, to some extent, mainnet liveness, basically, because it's independently governed by its own validator set. So these are pluses that I can think of.
So we have about a minute left, but I think I'm going to have us run a little bit longer. I want to ask 2 more questions. Gauthier, first of you, because you're speaking with a lot of subnet teams, and you're thinking about what are going to be their security needs, and otherwise, what are the sorts of verticals that you think we're most likely to see? Like right here we have 2 dexes. We see, off the grid in gaming, and there's a bunch of others. What are the areas that you think we'll be building here predominantly?
So Avalanche is taking the path of being like a strong place for gaming, and so hopefully a lot more interesting games will come. And I think one interesting thing here would be, for example, with HyperSDK and gaming, having more of the game logic on chain that would kind of make a bit also more sense to decentralize the networks, right? And so having real decentralized gaming chain will be very, very interesting, I think. Of course, DeFi. So those guys are building highly performant, DeFi chains. All around NFTs, like collectibles, we have like 01 that has a chain. There are other chains coming as well here. Lamina1 for IP. I think there is a lot of things even we didn't think about. But definitely the biggest one, I would say, gaming, DeFi, and also infrastructure, right? So because we're also going to need some like key features. For example, ourselves, we're building the Suzaku relay network as well, so how to decentralize the messaging piece within Avalanche, and so also expecting to see more infrastructure-based layer 1s dedicated to servicing other layer 1s here, and those especially will make sense to be decentralized way earlier in their life cycle.
Awesome. And then Gauthier, sorry, Antoine rather. You can have, much lower latency. You can have custom requirements when you're building a DEX as an L1. It can be a lot more performant. And right now, the percentage of spot volume that's on DEXs versus SEXs, it's about 15%. How much more do you think that can expand?
That's a good question. I think as with all L1s, it comes into how you're integrated into the ecosystem. Most of the volume of Dexalot is also coming from aggregators like Paraswap or YieldYak. So if you can get integrated in those ecosystems and abstract this whole logic of bridging to another chain and trading elsewhere, moving your money, your capital, I think we could bring a lot more of this volume on chain. And if we focus just on the tech and not only on the UX, we should be able to bring more market makers in who are now fighting to know who has the best setup because they want to hedge their profits and their positions more than So hopefully with this new tech and the Avalanche9000, the warp messaging, maybe we can bring it to 30–40%, and I think that would be a very good start before doing some more.
That'd be super exciting. Well, I think we're already a couple minutes over. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Maybe we can give them a round of applause. And they'll be around if you have any questions for afterwards.